Hi, this is Mike Bloom, editor of William & Mary's Global Voices newsletter. And today, Professor Nicola Medville and I got to sit down with French and Francophone Studies graduating senior Bridget Carr, who talked to us about her senior honors thesis on development aid to Senegal, the importance of learning a second language, and her plans after graduation.
My interest in the French language and studying French culture, but also Francophone culture, has really led me to what I did for my honors thesis, and just in general has enriched my understanding of a lot of things in my other classes because I'm also an IR major.
Good. Can you tell us a little bit about your honors thesis?
Sure. Well, I did a project about Franco-Senegalese relations and French development aid to Senegal. So I wanted to take sort of long-standing historical ties and examine them through the lens of a contemporary issue, which would be development aid flows from France to Senegal. And I defended it yesterday, and I'm very relieved to be finished. I will be sending it in to swim by the end of the week. But yeah, I don't know how detailed you would want.
So, where did this idea of a project on France and Senegal come from? Like, well, did you tie that to IFE, or why that project and not something else?
In IFE, they asked us about, which was my study abroad program in Paris, they asked us about what our interests were, and that's how they sort of placed us in our internships. And I got placed in a think tank that did comparative political studies, and I was looking through, and I had to do a project of my own, and so I was looking through their publication, and an article on comparative development aid stood out to me, and I thought it was really, really interesting. And since I'm an international relations major as well, that's a topic that I've explored in those classes. And so, you know, I just sort of ran with that. We had to write a 35-page paper in French, so that was a serious undertaking that took an entire semester. But yeah, so I was really interested in development aid, and especially French development aid. And so then I had another professor approach me about applying for the McCormick-Rebusson scholarship, and that's a research grant and scholarship, and so I could basically take the money and go wherever I wanted. And so immediately I started thinking about development aid as something that I would want to continue to research.
So can you tell us a little bit about the project that you did? You gave us the main ideas, but how do you divide that? What approach did you have, and what kind of documents have you been working with?
Well, I sort of divided the project into 3 chapters. The first chapter kind of just explores the historical ties from the founding of French West Africa in 1895 up until decolonization, because there weren't any definable development aid projects as we would define it today, but there certainly were development projects meant to develop these colonies because the French wanted to be able to exploit the human capital and, most importantly, the goods and trade routes and all of those things. So that's the first chapter, and it provides the foundation for the way that I evaluate relations in the Cold War and contemporary era. The second chapter explores French development aid programs during the Cold War and how France was really a strategic donor because it was trying to position itself separate from the USSR and the United States, and so they used development aid to friendly countries and allies, which Senegal was very, very close. And then my final chapter, which is the chapter that I sort of got most of my my inspiration from my previous paper that I wrote in Paris, talks about contemporary development aid, so from 1990 until the present day. And for that was where most of my primary sources came into play, because I did a couple of interviews, one with the ex-French ambassador, or ex-Senegalese ambassador to France, under both the Diouf and Wade administrations, which represented a huge change and shift in Senegalese policy. And also an interview with a French Minister of Foreign Affairs employee. He headed the programs for decentralized cooperation between sister regions in France and in Senegal. So that was absolutely fascinating. And then I also relied heavily on OECD development aid statistics. Unfortunately, I really wanted to also explore kind of what sectors the French concentrated most of their aid in, but the OECD database doesn't have reliable data from anywhere before the 1990s. So I realized that that was sort of out of the feasibility and scope of my project. So I had to adjust for that reason. But.
Okay. And at the end of the defense yesterday, I know that Professor LaRuth asked you what you thought would be a positive development in ed policy between France and Senegal, and I think you had an interesting answer, and linking that back to the decentralization.
Mm-hmm. Yes. The reason I fully expected going into this interview with the French foreign official that I would be, in my mind, ripping apart everything that they were, that they had proposed and that they were doing, because I always saw French involvement, like U.S. involvement, and like British and German. It's not a singular criticism of France, but it's mostly top down. And I had read a couple of books that really focused on sort of grassroots development aid projects and how they're so much better because they take into account the cultural climate, and it increases the ownership and incentives to finish the project, keep it going. If you're talking about, building technical expertise by involving the people on the ground who are actually going to be using whatever, if they're building a clinic, if they're even building wells or power plants. So my recommendation is to continue along that road. That could be more of a partnership rather than one country dictating what's important to the other one.
What do you think that the French and Francophone major is going to contribute to what you're going to do next? Can you tell us where you're going next? And do you think that what you've been doing here is going to be tied to what you're going to be doing next?
Yes, I was accepted into Georgetown School of Foreign Service for a master's in security studies, and I still haven't decided whether or not I'm going to apply for the Foreign Service. And so obviously having, language skills is 100% necessary, and French is the language of diplomacy, so you have to be able to speak I know at The Hague you have to be able to speak two of English, German, and French, so I got those two covered if I ever wanted to work at The Hague. But, so I mean, I just, in general, it has broadened my skill set and broadens my appeal to future employers, and especially working for the government. But it's also done a lot more than just, increase my earning potential or professional expertise. I think that learning another language, exploring another culture is, it should be the cornerstone of everything that we do in college, because I was lucky to start French in middle school, but I think that in doing so I've learned so much more than I ever would, even taking classes in about French history in English, or about, the Algerian War in English. I would never have the same perspective. You have the ability to read primary sources and accounts that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And just so many conversations that we've had it's so funny because I'll say something and you'll say, well, I mean, from the French perspective, and I'm like, oh wow, okay, I never actually really thought about it like that. So, I mean, I just think that it sort of helps you think outside of your own culture. So I will continue with French after I graduate. I'm sure that they have classes at Georgetown that I can continue to take, but I definitely don't want to lose it because it's taken me so long to gain in the first place. So.
Great, thank you very much, Bridget.